But we, while being in talks with our Chinese and Brazilian friends and others who, in good faith, want to promote this initiative, we tell them that the Charter goes far beyond than the territorial integrity alone, and the self-determination of nations principle also matters, no less. Otherwise, they would have had problems with decolonization of the African and other nations, and that was the principle underlying decolonization, which in turn reflected the impossibility for the African peoples to live under the rule of the colonizers. So equally, likewise, the people of Crimea, Donbass and Novorossiya will never be ruled by the Nazis that seized the power in Kiev. So the self-determination of peoples principle takes effect. The Crimeans decided back in 2014, and a couple of years ago the residents of Donbass and Novorossiya followed suit, and these are the real things that have been enshrined in our constitution. So if we want to talk in earnest, one should treat the principles of the Charter in their interrelationship, in their fullness, not selectively. And definitely we should also not be oblivious of the human rights respect principles. Article 1 of the Charter says that human rights should be respected irrespective of gender, sex, religion and color. The Russian language has been totally banned, annihilated in Ukraine. The Orthodox Canonic Church of Ukraine was banned. So all those who want to seek a foundation to resolve the crisis cannot turn a blind eye on the root causes. And President Xi Jinping of China, I remind you, in his Global Security Initiative in February 2023, dedicated to any sort of conflicts and principles of resolving thereof, emphasized in that instrument that there was an urgent need to spot and eliminate the root causes of any conflict in order to be able to resolve that. And also you have mentioned Mr. Kellogg, who has been voiced to be the prospective envoy for Russia and Ukraine of President Trump, has stated recently, we have seen an attempt by Russia and Ukraine in the framework of the Minsk process that failed, so we will not repeat that, he said. Well, actually, Mr. Kellogg yet has to dive into the Ukrainian dossier deeper, but the Minsk arrangements were not an attempt. They were the instruments signed by the leaders, and there was an additional declaration by the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany underlying it, that said that the Euro-Atlantic security would take into account the interests of all nations, and that also spelled out that efforts would be reinstated to restore a single space from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. Nothing of the paragraphs of that declaration, as well as the Minsk document with respect to the obligations of the Ukrainian regime, was delivered, and that paper was endorsed on the top level and was unanimously approved by the UN Security Council. So Mr. Kellogg probably ought to dig deeper into the matter. The Minsk Accords were not an attempt but a decision of the UN Security Council that was trampled upon with the connivance of the United States, and Mr. Poroshenko, the then President of Ukraine, signed it, and the former presidents and leaders of Germany and France, Hollande and Merkel, signed it, and they confessed a couple of years ago they were not going to deliver upon the Minsk arrangements. Just they played for time to pump Ukraine with arms, and now all those ideas in the air that are much less binding than the Minsk set of measures pursue a similar goal of playing for time for that Nazi regime. And as President Putin said, we would be ready to consider any earnest, specific proposals. Well, do some guesswork is premature. So I really hope that the Trump administration, including Mr. Kellogg, would look seriously into the root causes of the conflict, and we would be ready to hold consultations. And once again, if someone does not understand our repeatedly reinforced position, we would reconfirm it, reaffirm it. We're open for any talks if the talks are on the merits of which are the root causes and the principles that President Putin has mentioned in June this year, speaking here on the premises of the Foreign Ministry. And these are no preconditions, I emphasize that these are the requirements to deliver what has been subscribed when we approved the UN Charter. Thank you, the Chinese Media Corporation. Thank you very much, Maria. Mr. Minister, you have recently said that it becomes toxic when an American or European starts talking to you and the Europeans run away from you, just bolt away. With this approach, with this attitude, is it possible to resolve any serious international issues, and diplomacy as a tool of foreign affairs is workable in international affairs or not? And my second question is about the China and Russia bilaterals. So China and Russia have been consolidating the global majority of the global south. During the BRICS summit, our media corporation, together with VGTRK, held a round table with BRICS media outlets, and the participants spoke unanimously in favor to establish a mechanism of access to impartial and unbiased information. And the forthcoming year will be marked by China's hosting a SCO summit and will mark 80th anniversary of the victory over fascism. What is your take on whether what steps should be taken by China, Russia and the global south, including in the media space, to uphold the international order and the world peace after the end of the Second World War? Thank you very much. With respect to the methods applied by our Western colleagues in international settings, well, we could fret a lot, but this is useless, because political decisions have been made to alienate and isolate Russia in all respects. And crazy requirements are set forth that other countries should not have meetings with Russian representatives, stop trading, stop receiving them, stop going to Russia, buy more expensive energy, damaging themselves. These are the current methods of the Western diplomacy, boiling down to threats, sanctions, blackmail and chastising. And Josep Borrell, that stepped down recently as the EU foreign policy representative, has recently stated after his stepping down that the West has not been able to isolate Russia. Now he's not bound by the official obligations, and the EU promised to protect Kyiv for as long as it took, but nothing is endless. And he also said that China has substituted Europe and G7 in a trade with Russia, but you know, that dawned on him not during the last week, but everybody was aware of that, had been aware of that even before. The Western sanctions are damaging and detrimental to the population of those countries that apply the sanctions. In the US, they recently had a hurricane, and President Biden first paid no heed and then went on site. I recall the payout of $700 per person there, just peanuts and ridiculous. And there were protests, and with this attitude to one's own population, $150+ billion was sent to Ukraine over the past years. In France, they had poor crop yields, and the farmers protested, and the German industry has collapsed altogether. So they would know better how to behave, obviously, but I have a feeling that the Americans want to eliminate competitors. Now they're trying to do away with Russia, and now they move to China, and China is now target of restrictions of supplies of different chips and microelectronics to restrain the Chinese development. But the Chinese people, as well as the Russian people, would do what it takes for the development. But the Western methods are clear, crystal clear. Apart from us and apart from China, to a large extent, Europe also has fallen prey to the policy of the United States to eliminate all sorts of competitors. So we definitely keep that all in mind, and we repeatedly said that, and we would be ready to talk to all Western representatives that want equal and level playing field dialogue, and want to seek the balance of interests in confidential manner. These are Hungary, Slovakia, and other EU members. More and more of them just start asking for confidential meetings and talks, but openly very few of them volunteer. And there is the discipline of the rod in the EU. Kai Kallas, the new foreign policy representatives of the EU, has been telling the members how to behave. Let's look how it plays out. And the European bureaucracy is now compared to the more rigid Soviet bureaucracy. So I'm not sure whether she will be able to persuade them, and the bureaucracy will be able to persuade the members that they know better what the member states need. With respect to our relations, we are aware that Russia and China, and it is recognized far and wide, constitute a stabilizing factor for the international affairs. As an instance of the positive impact of ours on the international situation, I would cite BRICS interaction and countries representing different continents, civilizations, creeds and cultures interact under that umbrella, and all of that is embedded smoothly into the accords approved regularly by BRICS members, and that cover different areas, all the areas, politics, economy, culture, military and defense sphere, education, and all the spheres of human life. The popularity of BRICS is immense and enormous. Delegation of 35 nations attended the BRICS summit in Kazan, and 6 multilateral international organizations attended, including the UN Secretary General, and that speaks of the high cloud of BRICS, and that the fact that the interest to pursue a rapprochement with BRICS by another international entities is growing, and all those stakeholders pursue independent policies in foreign scene, and a multipolar world would be impossible, I'm convinced, without establishing closer ties between these groups of integration that don't have the leaders and the led ones, that don't give orders that are mandatory as in NATO or the EU. So a multipolar world definitely would take for granted that the Western colleagues also participate without a doubt. But how can they position themselves, whether they will get through that psychological loss of domination that they enjoyed for half a century? All of that depends on their political culture and their real sound understanding of their place in this real life, and their ability to act accordingly, in accordance to their new situation. And they should respect the achievements, legitimate requirements and achievements of other nations, including BRICS members. With respect to the mass media context and media coverage of BRICS countries, we presume that, well, we should clarify, if I may say so, the good principles of BRICS functioning and operation, with lots of rumors circulating today and fake news circulating today in the West. In order to counter all that, we should act, and they want just to dissuade Global South countries from closer ties with BRICS, those in Asia, Africa and Latin America. So promotion of media interaction is important to consolidate the positions of BRICS and the Global South in universal structures such as the UN and ASEAN, SCO, and definitely G20 and other formats. In all them formats, I underscore the bundle between Russia and China plays a very important consolidating part for the Global South nations.
You mentioned the upcoming anniversary of our victory in the Second World War. Our countries, Russia and China, took the brunt of the Japanese militarism and German fascism. We had many losses, more than anyone, and our leaders agreed to hold a decent celebration of the upcoming anniversary. These are the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War in Europe on May the 9th and September the 3rd. We celebrate the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War in the Far East. I'm convinced that information structures, information agencies of BRICS and other organizations where we cooperate with China will cover decently and broadly these events. And to conclude, we want to strengthen our media cooperation within BRICS. In September in Moscow, during Russian chairship in BRICS, we organized a media summit organized by BRICS with the support of China. It brought together 60 mass media agencies, and in October we held a roundtable, the dialogue for the mass media in the Kazan Federal University. I'm convinced that such events should be held on a regular basis. We should organize them more often, because this creates alternative platforms to get access to information for the population of the Global South, of the Global East, and everyone who is interested in the West. And we are seeing that this number is increasing. More and more people are willing to know the truth about what is going on beyond the European Union and NATO. Our colleagues from United Arab Emirates, you have the floor. Ashark News. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions. My first question is about Ukraine. Minister Lavrov, Moscow states repeatedly that it is ready to hold negotiations. A few minutes ago, you reaffirmed this fact. However, President Putin, during his press conference, said that Moscow is ready to negotiate with legitimate powers, with legitimate authorities. Whom should we talk with, and what outcome will be of the special military operation from the point of view of Moscow? Also, Moscow states that it is in contact with the new authorities in Syria, that the negotiations are underway. How do you see the future relations between Moscow and Damascus? Speaking about the legitimacy of the current Kyiv authorities, the so-called the President Putin, he said that Ukrainians should do with it on their own in order to bring the situation in Kyiv in line with the constitution of Ukraine. And to do so, if they want to have a legitimate president, they need to hold elections. And as President Putin said, only the Supreme Rada and the chief of the Supreme Rada are the legitimate representatives of Ukraine. But it is premature to speak about this. The main thing is not to select a negotiation team for the Kyiv regime, but to deal with the root causes of this crisis we want to eliminate. If we do not eliminate the root causes, we cannot reach an agreement. I will speak about them in detail And I do hope that everyone willing to pursue negotiations, and I do hope that they understand what is going on and what we mean. Let me repeat it once again. These are not preconditions. This is what all the participants, all the sides, all the parties of this conflict should have fulfilled long ago, in line with the obligations, in line with the UN Charter. The principles of the UN Charter should be implemented in their entirety and interconnectedness. With such an attitude, we are open to any earnest proposals, and I do hope that everyone understands. If we secure a temporary ceasefire and afterwards we renew the conflict, it is unacceptable. It is out of the question. We insist that the conflict should be ended on a solid legal basis by eliminating its root causes. I hope that we will achieve the understanding that this approach has no alternative. We did not recall our diplomats from Syria. Our embassy is still functioning like many other embassies. We are in contact with the new Syrian authorities. With the help of our diplomatic mission, first and foremost, we are talking about practical issues which have to do with the security of Russian citizens and safe functioning, safe working conditions of our embassy. We are open for a dialogue to discuss other issues which are on the agenda of our bilateral relations and the bilateral agenda and the regional agenda as well. As President Putin emphasized, we are open to cooperate with all governmental, non-governmental and political forces. We are in contact, we keep in touch, and this happened long before. I would like also to note that the head of the new authorities, Ahmed Shara, when speaking to BBC in his interview, and he characterized the relations between our states as long-term and strategic. We share this approach. Indeed, we have a lot in common with our Syrian friends. We contributed greatly to the liberation of Syria from colonial dependence. We contributed to education. Many Syrians graduated in Russia, and we are ready to develop and to promote such cooperation. I hope that when it comes to investment, to economy, where we already have some achievements, some progress reached over the course of the previous years, that we will be able to resume these efforts with the new authorities. We understand quite well that this process is quite difficult. This is a transition period. As it was declared, this is the run-up for the election, and before the election campaign will take place, the negotiation process should be implemented. The process should be inclusive, so that all political, ethnical, and religious groups take part in these elections. It's not an easy process, but we are ready to facilitate it, to assist it, also in the framework of the UN Security Council, in the Astana format, where Russia, together with Turkey and Iran, and with the participation of a good number of Arab states, is ready to support the consolidation of all Syrian processes and holding elections so that they are recognized by everyone. That is why here we have contacts with Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Qatar, Emirates, Bahrain, Lebanon. They all are interested to do so that Syria doesn't follow the path of the state of Lebanon when the NATO merely destroyed it. And now it is trying to rebuild itself. And they are not quite successful in doing so far. We will wait and see what role Syrian neighbors will play. We heard statements made by President Erdogan. We understand quite well the concerns of the Turkish people when it comes to security at the border with Syria, where terrorist incidents have occurred repeatedly, and these legitimate interests in security should be respected, but Syria should preserve its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity. And the Turkish government are speaking in favor of this, and we support such an approach. It is a very important thing to deal with the eastern part of Syria. The United States illegally occupied some part with the main oil deposits, with the most rich soils. They all excavate resources and they spend money to support separatist structures that Americans had established on the east of the Syrian state. We should consider all of this. We should prevent Syria from falling apart. Some are willing that some want this to happen, and it is quite important that Israel understand its responsibility for joint efforts. Israel should not try to guarantee its security at the expense of the security of others. This is the principle which was proclaimed long before. The security is indivisible. You cannot think, well, I will destroy all military sites of my neighbors, and then, till the end of times, I will live in prosperity. They call it to sow a storm. Telesur, Venezuela, you have the floor. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov and Madam Zakharova. I represent Telesur, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And I have the following question. Latin America and Russia are united by a favorable attitude. From the historical and cultural point of view, what concrete steps will Russia make in the coming year and in future in general in order to strengthen our ties, and what are Russia's priorities in the region? My second question. President Trump came to power in the US, and Russia is expecting to build more pragmatic relations with the United States. Nevertheless, we know that there is a threat to many Russian allies among the global South states. How could this influence the relations between Russia and the US? You are absolutely right. Relations between Russia and the states of Latin America and the Caribbean are traditionally friendly. Russian and Latin American peoples have long-standing positive attitudes towards each other. This is also manifested in their attitude to the world culture and the culture of each other, and this is what brings our peoples closer to each other. We receive signals from the overwhelming majority of Latin American states that they are willing to expand and to strengthen cooperation with the Russian Federation. We develop our dialogue in politics through diplomatic channels when it comes to economy, cultural and humanitarian cooperation. Our cooperation between the regions and municipalities of our states is also developing quite quickly, and we are ready to deepen this cooperation and partnership if Latin American states are willing to do so. Equal rights and mutual benefits, mutual respect, they form the foundation of our relations. There is no ideology, there are no doctrines, be it Monroe Doctrine or any other. But of course, we do pay attention when Biden president, during the recent 4 years of being in office, when they stated that they are concerned that Russia had sent a delegation to Nicaragua or Venezuela because this poses a risk to the United States security. Everyone understands quite well what risks the United States creates for the security of other states, because they have more than 200 military bases in many states, and thus they cannot prevent anyone from having relations with Russia. This approach has no future, and I do hope that the new administration in Washington will become aware of it. We have good prospects and we have good projects for the upcoming year. We have scheduled some visits. We are developing our relations not only bilaterally, but also with regional structures such as CELAC, ALBA, Mercosur, CARICOM, and many others. We believe that this year will be very fruitful from the point of view of the events we organize. In the upcoming months, we will see, so to say, a parade of anniversaries since the diplomatic relations were established. In March with Venezuela and the Dominican Republic, in April with Guatemala, in June with Ecuador and Colombia, in September with Cuba and Honduras, in October with Argentina, and December with Mexico. And of course, we will decently mark every anniversary. We will organize exhibitions, sessions for the youth, for public figures, for the civil society. This will help us to outline new prospects of our relations. This year, we are going to open a full functioning embassy in the Dominican Republic. In June, we will be happy to see our guests from Latin America at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Traditionally, we have a Latin American section there. This year, Bolivian President Mr. Arce was a guest of honor. This was the first time that the guest of such level took part in this event. Also, other forums in Russia will be of great interest to our Latin American friends: Eastern Economic Forum, Russian Energy Week, St. Petersburg International Cultural Forum, and many others. Despite the pandemic, despite the coronavirus pandemic, despite the sanction warfare unleashed by the West, we have steady and solid trade with Latin America. Our key trade partners, Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile, and they want to expand our trade and investments. We want to expand our trade with Nicaragua and Venezuela, who are now suffering from illegitimate sanctions imposed by the United States. We also implement bilateral projects with a good number of states, including in high technology sector. Also, we want the regional states to strengthen their contacts with the Eurasian Economic Commission and with the Eurasian Economic Union. The only non-regional observer in the Eurasian Economic Union is a Latin American state, it is Cuba. Also, I mentioned our cooperation in culture, education, sports. We are committed to further develop our cooperation as fast as possible. Today, we give education to almost 5,000 Latin American students. They study on a tuition fee basis, and the competition is very high. Of course, we will do everything possible to increase the number of quotas. We have annually. Also, I would like to emphasize that one of the unique traits, one of the unique features of our cooperation is the following. 27 states out of 33 have agreements on visa-free travels. This is a record high number as compared to other parts of the world. Russian tourists can visit Cuba, Dominican Republic, Venezuela. They can see the sites in Peru, Mexico, Guatemala. They can see Brazil Carnival. And this all appeals a good number of tourists and increases the tourist flow. Next year, we will have an opportunity to work together and to develop our multilateral cooperation in September 2025. We will hold the International Song Contest Intervision. More than 25 states would be happy to take part in it, including Latin American states.
Well, on our part, we would be ready to welcome and receive Latin American tourists, showing them Moscow, St. Pete, Baikal, Kamchatka, Sochi, Suzdal and Altai. We have lots of picturesque places and historical monuments and lots of heritage also. Also, there is an option to have a ride across the country on the Trans-Siberian Railway up to the Pacific Ocean, have a general view on our country with respect to the action by the US administration that is now endorsing its composition, and that will take office on the 20th of January. We never cherish any hopes or illusions, speaking about that this or that president will come and it is going to become better in this respect or in other respect, or will do something else. We will not do the guesswork. We will wait and see till the new administration is sure about its policies, is positive about its policies, and sets them forth. We know that there is Russophobic bipartisan consensus in the United States, and irrespective of a party allegiance, the ruling elites will promote and pursue their policies of weakening Russia, being their competitor. As I have said at the start of the press conference, any competitor, any rival, be it Russia, China or Europe, the United States wants to weaken them. No, not a single country in the world should be stronger than Russia. This is the principle they voiced long ago. Life is tougher than the declarations and good wishes, but to become aware of the real life, the United States has to go a long way and see how things develop and feel what the realities of the multipolar world is. At this point, Russia is dubbed as the adversary in the doctrines of the United States, and the current administration representatives called it an enemy. It also is dubbed as existential threat, immediate threat, and China is their next challenge. So the United States is quite consistent in what they say, but now we hear signals from the Trump team that they are interested in resuming dialogue, which is sound and normal, absolutely. Even if countries are at loggerheads, maintaining dialogue and getting to know each other's positions is the gist of diplomacy, and diplomats continue their intercourse even during wars. So if the messages that we can hear from the new Washington team to restore the dialogue that was cut off by Washington after the start of a special military operation. If all of that is in earnest, we will respond positively. But the Americans were the ones to sever the dialogue, so the ball is in their course. So if they take into account our legitimate interests in Washington, the dialogue will bear fruits and will not be useless. Otherwise, things will remain as they are. With respect to the threats that you mentioned by the new administration representatives towards global south and east, I mean like raising tariffs and imposing duties and punishing those who move away from the dollar to use other currencies and payment and settlement platforms. Well, this is little wonder. They always want to suppress competitors and gain unilateral benefits. It's nothing new. And they always have been pursuing policies of interfering with the domestic affairs of foreign nations. That has long reflected the methods of Washington. They will pursue in this vein, and one should be ready for that. But I'll say again that real life will compel the United States to have a better understanding of the real developments and trends in this world of today, and they are to become aware that they cannot rely on dictate in international affairs. Okay, and we move to TF1. Gerard Garot will be online with us, but we will not be able to see him, just hear his voice. Hello, I have two questions. Yesterday, on the 25th of December, around a dozen missiles moved towards Ukraine, were sent towards Ukraine, and that happened during Christmas. Don't you think it was something shocking? And my second question, in December, Macron organized a meeting one-on-one between Zelensky and Trump in Paris. Don't you think that the new president-elect will be more supportive of Kyiv than you previously said? Thank you. Well, with respect to the hostilities that are underway during as part of our special military operation, or better, as part of the war that the West, including France, proclaimed against Russia and conducts the war with the hands of the Ukrainian soldiers and regime. Well, I hope that you, representing a French outlet, not only heeded the action by our armed forces on the 25th of December, but you also have been tracking down all that process, and you know the root cause and nociology of the entire situation and where it has been heading. I would not like to take a lot of time talking about that, because repeatedly we spoke that we cannot accept the long-range missiles supplies, including Scalp, ATACMS and Storm Shadow, to the Kyiv regime. We warned that such lethal weapons supplies will only lead to escalation, and that the Kyiv regime cannot abide by the rules of warfare, combat rules, and probably some of the information is glossed over in Europe, but it is available on our media and social media, on the internet. Daily drone attacks or Western missile attacks against civilian targets are perpetrated, are committed, with casualties among civilians, and they impact ambulance cars and markets and civilian installations and facilities. No one from those in the West supplying arms to the Nazi regime in Kiev, warned the Kiev regime against breaching the international humanitarian law that grossly. So until this conduct of the Kiev regime goes on, and it's not only connived, it is guided by the West, including France. We will use our right to respond, but not as the Kiev regime does at your prompt. We target solely military facilities, the military and defense complex installations, and other targets that have to do with maintaining the army. On the 20th of December, when ATACMS and Storm Shadow hit civilian targets in Russia, we responded with high-precision weapons strikes on a control center, a design bureau in Kiev, Luch, that has been designing and producing missile systems, Neptune, and cruise missiles and missile launchers. As also we hit the air defense system Patriot, produced in the United States. All the targets have been impacted and destroyed, and we only target those facilities and targets, only impact those targets that are used to attack our territory. As our president has said, we select targets solely on the basis of them posing a threat to the Russian Federation. These may be defense installations and decision-making centers in Kiev, and the defense sector, also installations. But, hitting the civilian targets is not our habitual practices. These are the habitual practices of the Kiev regime and those supplying them arms to destroy solely civilian infrastructure and civilians. With respect to your second question, we are used to see a great deal of initiatives that France has been proclaiming and promoting. I remember in December 2015, President Hollande proposed an extraordinary conference on Libya to be convened, and everybody came there, and they pronounced speeches for a day and a half, and they forgot all about it later on. But there was a sneak peek on French TV. The French colleagues of ours want to showcase themselves and flaunt their initiatives, and we welcome their initiatives, but what the outcomes of those initiatives are and whether they're sincere in their initiatives, I'm not positive about that. I will not delve into detail, not to let anyone down, but several times our French colleagues addressed us via restricted channels, secure channels, offering help and establishing dialogue on the Ukrainian matter without the Ukrainian participation, violating the much doubted principle of the West, not a single word about Ukraine without Ukraine. We are ready to pursue contacts, we are ready to listen to what they have to say, but at the same time France has been the main champion of sending so-called peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, and they have been training Ukrainian troops on their soil, and they keep saying in public that Russia should be hit further, and Ukraine should have stronger positions when talks begin. So, it's very ambiguous, and we don't have thus a desire to take our French colleagues' initiatives in earnest. And with respect to the meeting that happened when Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral was reopened, I ain't seen any heartening, encouraging signals looking at the footages and images. So I think that the picture was the overarching goal of that, displaying two politicians and a Nazi style racist photograph themselves against the backdrop of the cathedral. To follow up on the topic of the French colleague, I'd like to heed that 2 weeks ago Hungary's Prime Minister Orbán stated on social media that Zelensky declined to establish the Christmas ceasefire. And the final question by Russia today. Thank you, Madam Zakharova, Mr. Minister. A happy forthcoming New Year. Two questions. First of all, NATO representative Patrick Turner stated about plans of NATO for 2025 that NATO would enhance its presence, and over the past year, the current year, NATO's presence tripled, and they want to strengthen it even more next year. How can you comment on NATO's plans to strengthen their presence in Ukraine, and whether we should expect an official response from Moscow on that? And my second question, I would like to continue the topic of Syria. What is the future of talks within the Astana format, bearing in mind that the format was highly efficient in coordination with all the Syrian sides of the Syrian conflict? With respect to NATO, mostly it's about the United States, CIA and other special services of the US have been around in Ukraine long before the coup d'etat, and they asserted themselves in Ukraine later. Afterwards, they took root there. They had an entire two floors in that building of Ukrainian Special Service, and so their involvement is well known. No one doubts that. The Anglo-Saxons run this show with the help of other North Atlantic countries and the EU members. With respect to the message that you have cited, not long ago, the Washington summit held in July established the office of senior representative of NATO in Ukraine. Currently, that mission has around 50 staff members, and 20 more will appear next year. Probably it is about this, but you know, it's not a big deal, I would say, but it is an additional factor still, saying that the Washington and their allies wants to tighten their grip on Ukraine, and they clench their fist in all these spheres, including defense and security sectors. And the West would recommend Zelensky to act for the benefit of the West, and they were quite transparent and brazen and outrageously brazen in public calls to lower the draft age. You remember Senator Lindsey Graham? He's still alive. He visited Ukraine and took pictures with Zelensky. So he said that there are lots of riches in Ukraine, including rare earth minerals. And, this treasure trove cannot be given into Russian hands, he said. So, and Secretary Blinken is known to publicly upholding the war in Ukraine, basing on the financial and economic benefits for the United States, and many lands, arable lands and mineral reserves of Ukraine long ago were purchased by Western and American corporations. This is an open secret. So all that we have been saying about the Ukrainian crisis and all the principle set forth by President Putin to resolve the conflict on the basis of eliminating the root causes, relying upon the international law and the existing obligations of the West and Ukraine. All that remains in force as our principled position with respect to Syria and the role of the Astana format. I touched upon that already. The Astana format was established as a result of a Syrian national political and ethno-confessional conference.
As part of the Astana format, we held sessions, we held meetings more than 20 times. The most recent one, we met in Doha on December the 7th. Just on the eve of the developments in Syria, we had an opportunity with my colleagues from Turkey, Iran, and Gary Peterson to talk about the situation, and we still exchange opinions on the Syrian case. Russian, Turkish, and Iranian position is as follows. The Astana format has a role to play at the current stage as well, especially given that it includes in the capacity of observers Arab states, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and they all express their interest, as well as the monarchies of the Persian Gulf. We indicated our commitment and our readiness to help. So did Turkey and Iran. Arab states know about the opportunities we have. They are in contact with the new authorities in Damascus. And given that Mr. Shara said about our relations, characterizing them as long-term and strategic ones, I believe that the new Syrian authorities will figure out in what form the Astana format would be helpful to the processes which are going on in Syria. Let me reiterate, we have close ties with the Syrian people since the Soviet Union epoch, when our state actively supported the aspiration of the Syrian people to get rid of French colonialism. And for the years to come, we contributed greatly to establishing economy, industry, social sphere of the Syrian Arab Republic. Generally speaking, we understand that the Syrian people want to have good relations with all international actors without any exception. We approve of such an approach. This is one of the key factors which would guarantee unity, territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Syrian state, and we are ready to assist these efforts in every possible way. It's quite understandable that Mr. Shara and his allies experience great pressure from all parts, from the United States, from Europe. Everyone is willing to cooperate, not in order to preserve unity of all political forces in Syria, but to get a bigger part of influence, or maybe even territory. With respect to the Western selfishness, it was quite emblematic when the representative of the diplomacy of the European Union, she stated that Syria should stop cooperating with Russia, and Estonia, and a representative from Estonia said that Estonia is not going to support the new authorities in Damascus unless they oust military bases of Russia from Syria. It is terrifying. This is nothing but diplomatic crudeness, and unfortunately this is becoming a habit. This is also the approach taken by the Ukrainian forces. They insult everyone who is unwilling to support them. Our European colleagues also follow suit. I hope that life will teach them to respect interests of all states without any exception and to abandon their neo-colonial habits. We will continue our work. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for participation. This is the end of the interview. Thank you very much.